Alright, what's going on, guys? The topic of today's video is one that we've addressed in the past, and it's one that at first might seem a little pointless to talk about, but if you're like me, you really appreciate the fact that in the Souls games, you get to enjoy a brutal and unforgiving journey where everything is stacked against you. We love these games because they're so hard, because the gameplay and the challenge is fun. When we overcome those challenges, the high that we experience is completely unmatched in gaming. And recently, there's been a lot of cause for concern that we might be losing that difficulty. There's been a resurgence in the past week of people that are deeply worried about the fact that Elden Ring might be too easy. And honestly, I think I might be on their side. Because after some recent comments from Yasuhiro Kitao and some new details that have emerged, I think people have every right to be concerned about this, and I'll explain. But as always, before we get started today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. On this channel we talk about all things Elden Ring, of which recently there's been a lot to talk about. However, before we can talk about this issue, we have to discuss one crucial detail that's at the center of this entire argument. And that's one thing that really sets Elden Ring aside from the past Souls games. And what that detail is the secondary market for Elden Ring. Elden Ring is really going to be a different story than the past Souls games for the fact that this game is going to be a new beginning for From Software. Elden Ring is being heavily marketed to new players that have never touched the Souls games before. I believe it's undeniable, more so than any past From Software game, that with Elden Ring we are going to see a wave of new casual players who are not accustomed to that brutal difficulty that we know and love. And it's not just a byproduct of the hype. From Software and Bandai Namco know this, and so they have a challenge ahead of them. They have the difficult task of creating a game that's going to appease the longtime Souls fans that want that brutal difficulty, that want to be killed over and over again. But they also have to ensure that the new players are not killed too much, that they ultimately put down the game and tell their friends not to buy it. And so as longtime Souls fans, we have to approach this argument with that in mind. So we need to change our approach from is Elden Ring going to be too easy to is Elden Ring going to achieve the balance that From Software is hoping for. So with that in mind, let's look at the quotes that really have people up in arms about this. And the first one I want to discuss today is Miyazaki's interview with PlayStation Blog. In the interview, they ask him about how they were going to be approaching difficulty with all the discourse going on about an easy mode. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to read through all this, but here were the key points he mentioned. He says that he realizes it's a valid discussion, but that their goal with the games is to encourage the player to overcome adversity. And the key takeaway from this is that he said he doesn't believe Elden Ring is necessarily easier, but that they've designed the game in a way to let the player avoid frustration. And the way they achieve this is through all the different options of play, and by having an open world allowing the player to go somewhere else if they're stuck on a boss. Now at first it doesn't sound so bad, but as a Souls veteran I can understand where the concern comes from. When I played the Elden Ring network test, I immediately recognized how the game was going to play. It looked and felt very familiar to Dark Souls 3, and so unlike Sekiro, I didn't really feel like the game was completely alien territory. And so when I first started the game and ran straight up to the Tree Sentinel, the first boss, I was able to immediately put up a decent fight. And even though I died, I didn't feel like it was unfair. To me, it felt like a standard Souls boss fight, and the reason I died was simply because I didn't know his full moveset. Now the main overworld bosses that we fought in the network test felt fine. However, there was a big stain in the network test, and in my opinion, the dungeon bosses were honestly so easy that it was almost immersion breaking. And they made up a majority of the closed network test content. I'm not joking, I died maybe 3 times in total to all of the dungeon bosses in the network test. And that was only with 1 or 2 added levels on top of my starting level. And I would only consider myself an average Souls player. I don't think it would be a stretch to say that if you're a Souls veteran, you would have to actually try to die to these bosses. However, I will say that fighting the Tree Sentinel, Agil, and Margit felt perfect and rewarding. And so it came as a surprise to hear Yasuhiro Kitao say that they were going to be nerfing Margit in the final build of the game. Kitao stated, "We didn't want to set out to make bosses harder for the sake of it. Margit was just too hard for the network test, we believe. He was just a little bit tweaked on the high end, so he does need some balancing for that early point in the game." The quote continues, "That of course applies to bosses who are crucial to progress the story of the game and to beat the game. In terms of bosses that are unessential and optional and hidden, there are some of these that we have deliberately increased the challenge for those players who want to seek out this kind of experience. Hopefully, if you're that way inclined, you can seek out some really tough challenges hidden away in the world." So here's where the dissonance begins. A lot of the concern I've seen from this quote is that people feel like the main story of the game is going to be too easy based off these words. They feel that they shouldn't have to go seek out the challenge, but that the main story itself should be just as challenging. And personally, I feel as if this criticism is a bit unwarranted. If I have to be completely honest, in my opinion, the main story of all the Souls games hasn't been the most challenging part. If we think back to Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, it's always been the DLC or the optional bosses that pose the biggest challenge, and then maybe 1 or 2 in the main line that's really a big roadblock. For example, Dark Souls 1, Manus, that's an optional boss. Dark Souls 2, Fume Knight, that's DLC. And Dark Souls 3, Nameless King and Midir, both DLC and optional. So while it is a bit scary to hear these words out of the mouth of the developer, I don't think it's going to change anything. I think the game is still going to be just as hard, from a structural level as it always has been and what we're accustomed to. However, here's where my concern arises. I do think this game is going to be significantly easier than the past Souls games to us, and here's why. The new gameplay changes that Elden Ring introduces don't really stray that much from the Dark Souls series. At its core, it's still the same gameplay loop and combat system. What we're having to learn now are the new Ash of War system and upgraded blocking, and these are things that Souls veterans will master in a matter of hours or even minutes. And so while the game might not be getting easier, we may just be getting better, and I do think that is significant. Sekiro was a game that many Souls veterans consider to be the hardest, and I do think the reason for that is because we had to learn an entirely new system and way of play. Everybody started out as a noob in Sekiro. Our experience with the Souls games didn't really help us at all, and in fact it was honestly a hindrance, because if you played Sekiro primarily using the dodge like you do in Souls games, you got punished for it. And so I think the problem within saying the main line is going to be a bit easier arises from the fact that we are in fact starting this game with experience. We're going to be jumping into this already past the learning curve, and so I do think that the concern there is warranted. I am slightly worried that Souls veterans are going to be able to master this game very quickly. Do I think Elden Ring is going to be easy? No. Is it going to be welcoming to new players? Yes. But I do think that the times of being stuck on a boss for 10 hours or even weeks will be a thing of the past. And personally, I welcome the change. While I absolutely love the brutal difficulty of the Souls games, I do think this new approach will be a good thing. I think that if they can execute on this idea and still maintain that difficulty through side bosses, and perhaps 1 or 2 in the main line just like the past games, then that balance can be achieved. But guys, that's going to pretty much do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on it. And let me know down below, do you think Elden Ring is going to be too easy? Or do you think it's going to be the perfect difficulty to welcome the new players while still pleasing the Souls veterans? As always though, subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll catch you in the next one.